You are standing on a cold beach in the far north of Japan. It is the summer of 1800. Ahead of you, an old man in a traveling robe is walking down the sand in a perfectly straight line, and he is counting out loud. 1, 2, 3. He does not stop. He does not look up. Every step he takes is exactly the same length as the step before it, about 69 centimeters, drilled into his legs over months of practice until his body could no longer make a wrong one. He is 55 years old. He has no rank. He has no soldiers. Behind him walk a handful of assistants carrying a knotted measuring cord, a compass mounted on a stand, and a telescope wrapped in cloth. Now, here's the part that should stop you. He is not measuring the beach. He is not, in his own mind, even measuring Japan. He is measuring the Earth. And the map he leaves behind will be so accurate that 61 years later, a British warship carrying the finest surveying instruments on the planet will stop charting this coastline, put its own work aside, and ask for a copy of his. How does that happen?
How does a country sealed off from Europe for 200 years produce a coastline more exact than the Royal Navy can draw? The answer begins with a man who should never have been holding a compass at all. His name is Ino Tadataka. For most of his life, he is not a scientist. He is a merchant. He is born in 1745 in a fishing village on the Kujukuri coast, and adopted at 17 into the Ino family of Sawara, a river town in what is now Chiba Prefecture. The family brews sake and trades rice. He runs the business. He pays the taxes, serves as a village headman, and organizes relief when famine tears through the countryside in the 1780s. By the standards of his own century, this is already a complete and successful life. Then, at 49, he hands the business to his son and retires. What would you do with the years you had left once your work was finished? Most men of his class rested. They wrote poetry. They studied tea. He moved to the shogun's capital of Edo, the city we now call Tokyo, and enrolled as a student. His teacher was Takahashi Yoshitoki, an astronomer at the shogunate's official calendar office, the government bureau responsible for watching the sky and fixing the calendar.
Takahashi was 31 years old. Ino was 50. He sat down as the oldest and least qualified pupil in the room and began learning mathematics and astronomy from a man young enough to be his son. That is your first clue. He did not come to Edo to make a map. He came for a question. The question was this: how big is the Earth? Educated men in Japan already accepted that the world was a sphere. What nobody there had measured was how large a sphere. And there is a way to find out, if you are patient enough. You take 2 points on the ground, one directly north of the other. You measure the distance between them on foot exactly. Then at each end, at night, you measure the angle of a fixed star above the horizon. The difference in those angles tells you how much of the planet's curve you just walked across. Multiply, and you have the size of the world. So he tried it in Edo. He measured the distance between his own house and the observatory across the city, took his star readings, and did the arithmetic. His teacher told him the answer was worthless. The baseline was a couple of kilometers long. To measure a planet, he would need a line hundreds of kilometers long, running north. And everything north of the main island was closed. That land was called Azo, the island we now know as Hokkaido. It was the homeland of the Ainu, only loosely held at its southern tip by a single domain, and no ordinary townsman simply walked there. To go, Ino would need permission from the shogunate itself. So he petitioned. And here is where the story looks for a moment like it has a simple ending. The government said yes. You might assume, then, that this was a great national project, a wise state funding a great scientific mind. That is not what happened. The shogunate was not interested in the size of the Earth at all. It was interested in Russians. Russian ships had begun appearing in the northern seas. In 1792, an envoy named Adam Laxman had arrived at Namuto, on the eastern tip of Azo, asking to open trade. The shogunate refused and then quietly panicked because it did not actually know the shape of its own northern coast.
It could not defend a shoreline it had never charted. So, an old retired brewer asking permission to walk north and measure things was, from the government's point of view, free labor. They approved a coastal survey. They granted him a stipend so small that he paid for most of the first expedition out of his own retirement savings. He left Edo in the spring of 1800 at 55 years old and was gone for 180 days. Picture the daily work. By day, he measures. Where the ground is easy, his assistants stretch the knotted cord. Where it is rough, he counts his own trained paces, that fixed 69 centimeters, over sand, over gravel, over mountain paths, and takes a compass bearing at every bend in the coast. Every turn of the shoreline becomes a number and an angle. Then night comes, and the real work starts. He sets up the telescope, waits for the sky to clear, and measures the height of the stars to fix exactly how far north he now stands. Then he sits down by lamplight and recalculates the day. If the sky is clouded, the night is wasted. If it rains for a week, he waits.
Do you understand what that means? This man is walking Japan twice, once with his legs and once, every night, with his hands on paper. He came back from that first journey with a chart of the southeastern coast of Ezo, and something else. He had his baseline, and he had his number. He calculated the length of 1 degree of latitude on the Earth's surface as about 28.2 V, the traditional Japanese unit of distance. In modern terms, that is roughly 110.7 kilometers. The true figure is about 111 kilometers. He was off by less than 0.5%. A retired sake merchant, with no European instrument more advanced than a telescope, measured the size of the planet by walking up a beach and counting. And the map, the thing history remembers him for, was never the goal. The map was the byproduct. He needed to walk the country accurately to answer a question about the sky, and Japan simply appeared underneath his feet as he did it. The shogunate saw the chart he brought back, and everything changed. Suddenly, he was not a hobbyist. He was given real funding, official standing, and a mandate. Map the rest. So he did. 10 expeditions, 17 years. Out along the Pacific coast, down the inland sea, up the Japan seashore, around Kyushu twice, out to the smaller islands, into his 60s, into his 70s. The distance he covered is usually given as about 35,000 kilometers, and some accounts put it closer to 40,000. Either way, note what that number is. The circumference of the Earth is roughly 40,000 kilometers. He walked the length of the planet in order to measure it. He was not alone, and he never claimed to be. Around 20 assistants worked under him across those years, and the far northern coasts he could not reach were filled in later from the surveys of the explorer Mamiya Rinzo, whose work was folded into the final sheets. He did not live to see it finished. Ino Tadataka died in 1818, at 73, with the map still incomplete. And then his students did something extraordinary. They hid his death. For 3 years, they kept the funeral quiet and kept working, because they were afraid that if the shogunate learned the master was gone, the funding would stop and the map would die with him. In 1821, the completed work was presented to the government under his name, 3 years after the man himself was in the ground. It was called the Dai Nihon Enkai Yochi Zenzu, the complete map of the coasts of Great Japan, drawn at 3 scales, the largest running to more than 200 enormous sheets. Now, at last, go back to that British warship. In 1861, the survey ship Actaeon arrived to chart the Japanese coast, as Britain was doing all across the world. Japanese officials showed the visiting officers a copy of Ino's maps. The British compared them against their own soundings and measurements of the same shoreline, found that the Japanese charts held up, and abandoned much of their own survey, taking copies instead. That is your answer. A sealed country beat the Royal Navy because one man walked it, coastline by coastline, for 17 years, on foot. But this map was never treated as a gift to the world. It was treated as a weapon. In 1828, A German doctor named Philipp Franz von Siebold, working at the Dutch trading post in Nagasaki, obtained copies of the Ino maps from Takahashi Kagayasu, the son of Ino's old teacher and the man who had led the map's completion. When it was discovered, Siebold was expelled from Japan. Takahashi was arrested. He died in prison the following year, and the authorities preserved his body in salt so that the sentence could still be pronounced over his corpse. To know the true shape of Japan in that century was to hold something the state would kill to keep. And then, slowly, the maps themselves began to vanish. The originals held in Edo Castle burned in a fire in 1873. The main set of copies at the Imperial University burned in the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. For most of the 20th century, what survived was fragments and second-hand tracings. Then, in 2001, a complete set of 207 sheets turned up in the map collection of the Library of Congress in Washington. They had been sitting there, uncatalogued for what they were, for decades. Here is what happens when you lay one of those sheets over a modern satellite image. The coast of Kyushu lines up, the bays line up, the islands sit almost exactly where the satellites say they should, because latitude is the thing he measured best, and he measured it with the sky. The east to west stretch is the weak point, and he knew it, because fixing longitude in 1800 required a clock more precise than anything he had. He could not carry accurate time across a country, so he carried accurate stars instead. You can still stand in his house. It survives in Sawara, in Katori, on the same riverbank where he counted sake barrels for 30 years before any of this began. Every year, people retrace sections of his route on foot, in ordinary shoes, following a line drawn by a man's stride 2 centuries ago. And the thing that still cannot quite be answered is what he thought he was doing at the end. He got his number by 1801. He had his answer within a year. He kept walking for 16 more. He was 55 when he took the first step, and he had already lived a whole successful life before it. So what is the thing you have quietly decided you started too late for?